Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security, where we look at OT security through the lens of common sense, which leads to different results than the lens of dramatization and fear-mongering. Today, we are discussing a very mundane yet powerful topic of OT asset inventories in our mini-series on, OT asset inventory basics, and that is product data enrichment. How does that work? It's basically very simple. If you are able to reliably discover your product that you're using or your various products, then this will, from the discovery process, this will only give you basic data on the product identity. However, you can use that data and link it to the additional information about the product that the vendor makes available on their website. So this is in a nutshell how that works. You take your reliable identification and match that with vendor provided data. Let's see how this works in real life. So here you see the OTbase device inventory, and we're going to open a device profile for this one automation system here. Ignore the floor map, etc. That's not important for today's topic. Here you see all the various slots in that control system rack, and you see how they are populated. So we see a couple of I/O modules, we see the CPU and 2 communication adapters. Now, what I would like to do is draw your attention to the product descriptions that you see here in that rightmost column. These product descriptions are not yielded by the device when we discover the device. So what we get from the device is this label right here. So it's in this example 1756 IRT 8I/A. But since we have identified this reliably, we can now use that product identifier to pull additional information from our database about that product. And this is what you see here. And certainly this is very, very helpful because we cannot expect every user of the product to be familiar with all the various product identifiers that the automation vendors use. But if you're not familiar with the exact meaning of an ENBT or something like that, you will have the full text description right here automatically, and that's certainly the interesting piece. This whole matching, this product data enrichment happens automatically behind the scenes. You don't need to type it in manually. You don't need a copy and paste, etc. So even if you are not a Rockwell product expert, this certainly makes sense to you. Something like, this is a thermocouple with eight individual isolated points. So that's one example. The other example that you see here is when you look at the firmware versions, which are also taken from the discovery process. This is something that the device delivers. So it's just when you inquire what is your firmware version, you will get it using the correct protocol, in this case Ethernet IP. And what you see here is some of these firmware versions are in black, others are in orange. Now the orange highlight simply tells you this version is outdated. It's not the most recent firmware version. Certainly something that the device doesn't know. All right, but since we have reliably identified the device, or in this case the I/O card, we can also look it up on the vendor's product pages what the latest firmware version is. And if there is a discrepancy, the current firmware that is installed on the device will be highlighted in orange. This is what you see here. And it even gets better when you hover over this entry. In the tooltip, you will see what the latest firmware version actually is. Now, certainly that does not imply that you have to run and install the latest firmware version, but it does tell you, well, maybe it's worthwhile checking out all the differences, all the updates, or the bug fixes. Usually when it comes to automation devices, the firmware updates are all about bug fixes. So it might be worthwhile checking what's new in that version 2.13. Next topic here in this whole area. If you look at this particular column, lifecycle phase, this is the product lifecycle phase. And it tells us, well, all those modules, they are still active, meaning you can still purchase them, but not this one here, the 1756 ENBT. It's discontinued. And that leads us then to the obsolescence management. And by the way, you will not just see that in this device profile, you will also see it for the whole product or for your whole installed base. OTbase can easily show you all the devices that are no longer in an active lifecycle stage as far as the vendor is concerned. So something you can then use for your obsolescence management. The last thing that I want to point out is for any product that you see here, you can always get even further information. So let's just drill down here into the product, into this I/O module that we have looked at earlier, where we have seen what the firmware versions are, etc. And once that you do that drill down to the product profile, as we call it in OTbase, it will not only show you where you have all those instances, like the one in Flatrock that we have just looked at, but it will also contain a vendor link. And that vendor link, if I click on it, will automatically open the product page at the vendor. So in this case, the Rockwell Automation, and we did the best-selling ControlLogix 8-point RTD thermocouple. And there you can get all the additional details, and you can even download your firmware. All right, available downloads, firmware. So here is where you could directly go to the firmware download and then update the firmware on your existing device. And again, this did not require any manual effort from the user. All of this is provided automatically by OTbase. And how is that even possible? Well, the secret is the reliable device identification or product identification, right? So when we talk about I/O modules, we don't think of those as standalone devices, but just as modules in a rack. So once that you have reliably determined what product it is, then the contextualization with the vendor data happens automatically behind the scenes. And that just gives you a whole lot of context that will make your life easier, or in other words, it's going to make you more productive, because you will be able to spot pretty quickly if, for example, a firmware update is called for. You know right away what that thing is, even if you are not familiar with the Rockwell product nomenclature, etc. You will see right away if the product is in an active lifecycle stage or not. So that's the benefit of vendor product data contextualization. And it's just one example on what you can achieve when your discovery is reliable and exact. How do you arrive there? You arrive there with OTbase discovery products, which are all software products. And the reason why they yield so accurate results is, well, they simply probe the devices. They do the same thing as you would see in RS Links, as an example, or in TIA Portal when you think about the Siemens universe, okay? That's the secret behind all of it. And that is so super important if you want to arrive at a useful OT asset inventory. Once that you have reliably identified the product, then this contextualization can happen automatically behind the scenes, and you will just get a plethora of important data just like that. And this is the same secret behind the vulnerability mapping that you will also see in OTbase, because it also requires a reliable product identification, and including the firmware versions, etc. So this is how that works, and why the discovery piece is so super important. This is where it all starts. So you could also say the OT asset inventory in a useful form, in an accurate and comprehensive form, is the start of every OT asset of every OT security journey. It's the first step. And if you get that step wrong, everything that follows will go in the wrong direction. This is why it's so super important. Okay, so today we have the opportunity to cut it short, because there isn't a lot of other stuff to talk about the product details. I don't see any questions, so therefore I just save you another 18 minutes and see you next week. Bye-bye.